You've reached Hotel Pacifico, your 5-star destination for BC politicos. Press 4 for room service. Press the star key for your hosts Mike McDonald and Kate Hammer.
Welcome back, guests. Welcome back, Mike, from the land of Aloha. We've got a great show again today. Yeah, he was just in Hawaii.
It went below zero in Vancouver. It's freezing. Oh my God.
Yeah, it must have been a system shock.
And not only it's going to get worse for me tomorrow when I go to Prince George.
That's right.
I might be a Cuba by the end of Tuesday.
You will be.
Well, you're getting ahead of me because we will be talking more about Prince George and about this Arctic outflow later in the strategy suite. And we will be meeting up later with Geoff and the minibar. But for now, first, our guest today is Crystal Smith, Chief Counselor at the Haisla Nation. Welcome to Hotel Pacifico, Chris.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So can you start us just by talking to us about the traditional ancestral lands of the Haisla people and sort of where you're from, where you've grown up? Tell us a bit about them.
Okay. Our traditional territory resides at the head of the Douglas Channel on the northwest coast of British Columbia. We have approximately 2,000 band members and continuously growing, which is very optimistic and great to see. I've grown up there literally my entire life. I was born, my twin and I were born in Vancouver and have lived in Kitimat at our home I'm going to be 45 next month. So my entire 45 years has been spent being at home.
And the Kitimat village, I've had the honor to be there once, visiting your predecessor, and a lovely spot at Douglas Channel. And most Haisla members are living at the Kitimat village site. That's your main kind of community site, right?
Yes. So we have approximately, I want to say about 900. And that's continuously growing, which is absolutely optimistic as we see more people gaining their independence, being able to provide their own mortgages and moving home for opportunities that we have at home. So we have about 900 that reside on reserve. And then we've got about 300-400 within the Kitimat town side, along with Terrace, and the rest reside elsewhere in British Columbia and to be frank, around the world.
And so you've been... Good.
Well, I was just going to say, the Haisla have been there since time immemorial. When you're at your Kitimat village site, and you look across Douglas Channel, you're looking across at heavy industry with Rio Tinto Alcan and other projects now coming forward. But also the district of Kitimat is a pretty young town. I think was built in the 1950s, right?
Yes, so the town of Kitimat actually was developed for Alcan, which is now Rio Tinto, for the development of that facility along with their Kimano site. So we've been in our territory since time immemorial. Actually, some exciting things transpired during LNG Canada's build, where we uncovered some fish weirs that dated back to I believe it was 1,800 years ago. So we've been in our territory for centuries, and we've witnessed the development. And you're absolutely correct. When you're walking on the ocean front street in our community, and as a child growing up, I was able to see Alcan from literally from my front porch. Urcan and Methanex all operating in our territory. So it was definitely a town built on industry.
Mm-hmm. As a child growing up there too, then like where did you see yourself in the future in terms of job opportunities? Did you see yourself working on one of those facilities, or what was the future you envisioned?
I think about not only what was physically in our territory, but I often talk about what it was like mentally growing up as an Indigenous woman. Far often again, and it was a conversation that was constantly happening, and I know for a fact that the conversations were happening because the people having them wanted to see change in our community. But I would often hear statistics about you know, our kids weren't being successful in academics. We have very low success rates in high school. Most of our people would end up, and specifically Indigenous women, would end up on social assistance. So I was constantly hearing about the negative statistics in being an Indigenous girl. And you combine that with looking around in our community, and my stepfather was a very, very educated, very intelligent Indigenous man. And he would often talk to my twin and I about, you need to plan for your future. And he would instill that thought in us about not becoming a statistic. You need to plan for college, you have to plan for university. And looking around our community, there was as I walked to basketball practice, I would look at Alcan and the other industries in our territory. And up to the right, if you're walking down our front street, was our old band office. And, you know, I often would think it's either one of these two places. And I visioned myself working for our band, either as possibly a janitor or a front desk receptionist. So I think there was a huge combination of that contributed to, I would say, and I'm not saying this in a negative manner, and people can take it for what it is, but not having too much exposure to what the possibilities of could be of what I wanted to do when I was younger.
What was that moment that you thought you could, there was maybe a broader opportunities for you, or maybe a position of leadership for you? When did you start to make that pivot?
You know, I actually, it was our previous chief counselor, Ellis Ross. I had taken a year of leave in order to pursue my diploma in business administration. And when I came back to work, I was his executive assistant, and I was constantly getting asked, can he come speak here? Can he come speak there? And Ellis and I are really good friends. And I had said, what is all the hype about you? Well, why do all these people want to listen to you speak? And we had talked about it, and I said, well, I want to see what this hype is about. Can I come listen to you speak one of these times? And he chose an opportunity that he knew was going to be a good environment, very well attended. So we went down to Vancouver, and I had listened to him speak, and it absolutely moved me. He talked, I visioned myself as one of the members that he was advocating for. And he wanted to see the change. He wanted a different opportunity, and he was tired of relying on governments, different levels of government. So from that moment, we took a cab out to the airport, and I told him, I think I want to run in the next election, which was happening that year in 2013.
The Heisler election, yeah.
Yes. So I think he was definitely, he still is inspiring. So I wanted to be more of an active role in a decision making and help him and his vision come to a reality.
So you did become chief counselor. Is it 2017?
Yes. Now that I did not vision. Actually, when I became a council member, two of my one is a really good friend of mine, still to this day, and he looked at me and said, next you're going to be chief. And there were some colorful words stated to him, and I said, that's not going to happen. But things as they happened, Ellis decided that he would pursue provincial politics, and decided that he would have to step away from being chief counselor a little bit early. So in 2016, I became the acting chief counselor for about 8 months. And then 2017, I was successfully elected in that election for our community.
How did that shift feel? I mean, again, to your point, it wasn't what you envisioned, like, and it really was kind of Ellis Ross, MLA, moving on, right? And it really was an opening that became available. So when you were stepping into that, did you have reservations about whether this was for you? Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, when he was, and it wasn't public knowledge in regards to him stepping aside. So I had known for quite a while, and trust me, I did my part in trying to convince him to stay. You don't have to leave. I'll do this, we'll do that. And there was just no convincing him to stay. And being the acting chief counselor was very easy. It was 8 months, and not too much happened. And being it wasn't a permanent position, so I don't think too many people at the time they were holding off until the election for much of anything. I didn't have to do speaking engagements in the 8 months. I didn't have to do interviews on the radio, or so I was thinking this could be easy. After witnessing what Ellis had to go through. And then the election happened, and I didn't get the results until about 2:30 in the morning. So I was with, both of my girls were with me at our gym waiting for the final count of the results. And when I got home, and I had put my younger daughter to bed and ended up falling asleep with her. And when we woke up the next morning, I think my first words, I didn't say good morning or anything. I just looked at her and said, "What did I do?"
So many of our listeners may not understand the breadth of responsibilities that First Nation government contends with, because basically you have federal responsibilities, provincial responsibilities, abilities in terms of the types of things those levels of government deliver. You're doing it all: health, education, culture, plus, plus, plus. Tell us a bit more about all, what's on your plate.
It is definitely an overload. One thing that I'm definitely grateful for is the team that I have, that we have at the Nation, including other council members and our staff. But it is a lot of responsibility. I can get messages on a daily basis from members in regards to housing issues or health related issues, education. They've been denied an application, or they haven't received payment in regards to their living costs. It is a huge, vast responsibility in regards to what our elected leadership are responsible for. We've got so many different moving files. Anywhere I could be dealing with a social work issue 1 minute, and then sitting here with you lovely folks the next minute. It is there's never been a day where it is the same. We deal with the ECDEV side, where we're sitting in with major proponents. It is, and as I'm speaking about it, and I definitely get that comment made most often about what our leadership definitely has to endure. But it is definitely one that is, I wouldn't change this experience for the world of what I've had to, what I've encountered over the last 6 years.
I mean, it's interesting because I'm trying to remember how long Ellis Ross was chief counselor, but for a decade-ish, or?
He was on our council for quite a few years. He was elected in 2011.
Okay.
And he served until 2016.
Okay, 5 years.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so about
sorry.
5 years.
I was rounding up, but I guess where my mind was going, because it's interesting, because you've been there for 6 years now, and I think it's been such an interesting time, particularly on the ECDEV side, right? Like, just with sort of the pandemic and with LNG, and just I wonder, like, you were mentioning you're friends with Ellis Ross. Do you ever get together and go like, hey, could we do tradesies? Like your time was so much chiller than mine. Like,
I think he would not necessarily, I definitely wouldn't compare. He had his moments for sure, especially the one memory that I have being one of his counselors was when LNG Canada, Andy Calitz, we were down in Vancouver for a leader to leader meeting. I believe it was in 2016, where it was Andy had the unfortunate conversation with Ellis in a separate room from us, letting him know that they were delaying their FID. And I will never ever forget that day, just how it was, and looking at and witnessing Ellis, his body language, his tone of voice. So he definitely had his moments, specifically within his term. I don't know if I'd want to trade him.
Well,
Fair enough.
I mean, Ellis was chief counselor when the LNG agenda in British Columbia kind of started to take off. And then, as you just mentioned, there was a setback, yet a few years later, it came back. And now Haisla are on the water's edge and the export terminal for LNG Canada, which I think is the largest private sector industrial project in Canadian history, connected to one of the largest, if not the largest, pipeline projects in history, which is now complete, Coastal GasLink. So the Haisla are situated at a very strategic location to host that industrial development. And as you mentioned earlier, Alcan was there first. So you've got some history with industrial development in your valley, but it wasn't. I assume it wasn't a blank check or a unconditional welcome to LNG Canada, because I think Haisla had a negative view towards Northern Gateway in the past. So I'm interested how the Haisla processed that opportunity, and how did you weigh the benefits versus the costs and impacts and things like that?
I'm happy that you had mentioned another project in our territory, and we are definitely fortunate of where we reside in the Douglas Channel, with our port. And we definitely aren't new to in industrial development. It's been in our territory. We've witnessed the devastation in regards to our cultural attachment to our territory and our lands. However, and with all the proposed projects and we see many projects come and look at our territory, whether it be refineries, oil, LNG, propane, methanol. We've had all proposals within the last 10 years in regards to what the possibilities are for the west side of the Douglas Channel. And as LNG was coming and introducing themselves to our community, we were again fortunate enough to be able to weigh the pros and cons of each of the proposals that were coming to our nation in regards to the export possibilities. And LNG was the least impactful in regards to what the possibilities were in comparison to other commodities. And at that time, the leadership did their due diligence in regards to educating themselves on what the impacts were, environmental, social, and weighing the pros and cons of each of them. LNG came out in the lead in regards to what we would be able to bring to our community, and I think was the most vital and crucial step that our leadership under Ellis's lead was the communication to our membership and getting their backing and their support to be able to pursue these projects.
And what has that meant for Haisla members? You know, there's been a lot of construction over the last 5 years. How's that play on the street? What's the real impact?
I've seen so many different scenarios, and I would be naive to think that it's been all positive. Of course, we've had our challenges in regards to some of the impacts that have been brought to our community. But for the most part, the positive side of it has been absolutely tremendous to witness. Prior to LNG Canada announcing their positive FID, I often talked about the hope that we had in regards to changing individual lives, and we've seen that come to fruition. I've witnessed members as young as 25 gain their own mortgages and have their own homes in our communities. I've witnessed members, taking vacations to Mexico, Hawaii, Disneyland. But the most important portion of seeing a lot of that hope come to fruition is seeing our language and our culture. We fully fund our language and culture department, which consists of about 10 to 20 employees, which their sole mandate is to revive our language, preserve our language and our culture. And it is absolutely amazing to see. We've hired our first manager within the last 6 months, and it's literally taken off. I've stated earlier, I've got an identical twin sister, Liana, and she works at our community school. And she is our language and culture teacher there. So I'm being able to witness this firsthand, where she's taken some courses and they're developing curriculum. So I get the opportunity every now and then to see what she's been able to accomplish in learning our language, and is absolutely emotional for me to witness. We lost our grandmother when we were quite young. My grandparents were the fluent speakers in our household. And when I hear her speak, I'm sorry. I hear and I feel our grandmother being present. She sings songs in fluently in our language to our grandsons, and it's absolutely amazing. So yeah,
I've heard you speak before about the influence your grandparents had on you.
Yeah.
And I think it was a speech 4 years ago in Prince George, the BC Natural Resources Forum, where you talked about how you grew up poor, but you didn't feel poor because of the traditional learnings you had, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yes, absolutely.
And what, for those of us who aren't familiar with that, what the food, is it the cultural ways, like what, describe that for us?
It is definitely a combination of all of those. As I grew up in a household where I had my grandparents. I had my parents living there for a little bit, and then I had my two uncles. So we were all in I think it was a 5 or 6 bedroom household, and they never let my twin and I go without anything. And it was a combination of each of them pitching in, whether it was financial, but we were consistently surrounded. Our community, when we go to harvest, say Ulikins, it is a community family oriented event, where we take care of each of our families and our communities. It still happens to this day where during the Ulikin harvest, our community will go out to a place called Kimano and harvest the Ulikins, and they'll do their individual camps and process the Ulikins as individual families. However, they take care of the community first, where they send a boatload of Ulikins back home to our community, and our membership just go down to our docks and with a pail or whatever they have, and they take their share and they go home. So we're always in looking after whether it be harvesting salmon and preserving it. So I always grew up with my grandparents' house is on right in the waterfront. I remember as a child, my grandfather going out in his little boat, going out to the front of our community and checking a net. He'd catch a fish and he'd come home, and that's what my grandmother would cook for us. So we never went without. And it was, like I say, I think it was later in my years when I started playing basketball and looking at other basketball players wearing Michael Jordan shoes, where I kind of looked at my shoes and thought, I'm going to ask my mom for a pair. And having it, and not only having a one income household with my parents, but having a set of twins that you had to kind of purchase the same thing for, because it would cause an argument between us. I would, and now that I'm older, I can definitely see the constraints that my parents had, but they never let us go without. Eventually I worked hard enough to be able to get a pair of those Jordans through literally blood, sweat, and tears of helping my dad and my grandparents around the house. But eventually he made my stepfather made me work for it. So
How's your jump shot?
it's I don't have one of those anymore.
I hear in your story, though, an interesting reflection of what you've navigated in your leadership role too, because you have a childhood, rooted in the land and rooted in so many of those traditional practices that for so long industry was so harmful and hurtful to so many of those cultural practices. And now you're in a leadership position, bringing along your nation and helping to see a different relationship to this resource development that I'm sure for some folks is really hard. Especially, if they've grown up in the territory and maybe seen some ill effects to some of the wildlife and the ecosystem there. Can you tell us a little bit about, like, how do you navigate those conversations? How do you bring consensus around something? As I'm thinking of too, and how do you bring consensus for something like the ownership of the Cedar LNG project?
Well, the consensus around having difficult conversations is managed in a day in, day out scenario. It honestly it depends on what stage of the project's in, and that hasn't stopped. We continually have community engagements with LNG Canada and with Coastal GasLink in regards to some of the information. Right now, we are going through community engagement sessions around startup. And I think managing and getting accurate information out to our community is absolutely vital when they can, especially when they can see the differences and the changes in the landscape of our territory occurring, and managing that alongside LNG Canada, but most importantly, having our own team, our own educated HISLA members in regards to the environmental aspect. It has been definitely a plus for us in this process, but it's managing the timing, being proactive as opposed to being reactive, getting as much information out before any type of work occurs, to let our people know what to expect when this development's happening. So we've definitely taken that into account in anything that we as the nation do. And that goes to the administrative social side of our programs and services as well. The ownership of Cedar happened when we were doing our engagement sessions with our community through the LNG Canada and Coastal GasLink engagement sessions, even before a positive final investment decision was made. I believe we signed the agreements with LNG Canada in 2015. So those engagement sessions happened well before. And to be frank and honest, that because it's the largest the largest portion of our agreements with LNG Canada in regards to the support of the project, I think that piece was where we gained majority of the support from our people, is that ownership and that vision of having our own facility that would be majority owned by the nation. That was a key piece in our community support to see the potential. And we gave all the other information in regards to what LNG Canada, what their positive final investment decision would mean, both from an opportunity and education side, but also the monetary aspect. And at that time we couldn't do that with Cedar, simply because it was just coming from, it was a vision of our consultant and lawyer negotiating team. And to be honest, we didn't think we'd get this far.
So you managed to leverage the LNG Canada project to have your own project, Cedar LNG.
Yes. So we negotiated 400 MMCF of capacity off the Coastal GasLink project, which meant we didn't have to build any other infrastructure.
Pipelines there,
Yes. The Cedar, we wouldn't have to build another pipeline. And we would simply have ownership of space on it.
And then you have your own separate facility. Cedar be a separate floating facility, I think?
Yes.
Right.
It would be. And
even though it's smaller than LNG Canada, it's a multi-billion-dollar project, right?
Yes, it is. It's 1/4 the size of LNG Canada.
Yeah. So that's in its own right would be one of the biggest projects in British Columbia if it goes ahead. And
it is going to be the largest private sector investment that is Indigenous owned and Indigenous led. And every time I say that, I get goosebumps.
In the world?
In the world.
In the world. Largest Indigenous owned project in the world.
Indigenous led, yeah. Wow.
Majority owned by the Haisla, right?
Yes, majority owned.
Yeah. So that's a big deal, but you're not over the finish line yet.
No, but we're definitely getting there. This has definitely, and I relate this, and I consistently tell our other board members of Cedar that from our Haisla side, this project roller coaster is normal. Like the ups and downs of it, we experienced with LNG Canada, leading up to their positive final investment decision. It is a different feeling and something that definitely keeps me awake at night is that majority owned by us. That is definitely the different aspect of it.
This was about a year ago. You were waiting for environmental assessment certificate for Cedar that was due, I think, at the end of December, and it was delayed.
Yes.
And you ultimately received it, I think, in March or thereabouts. Yes. But during that, you just mentioned the roller coaster. During those times, were you nervous? Were you ever feeling like this could slip through our fingers, or
Absolutely.
were you confident? Yeah.
No, I definitely had those moments of playing out a scenario of not obtaining those certificates and not being successful within any process that we had going with Cedar. But that delay we were supposed to hear around Christmas time, and then hearing the feedback of why it was being pushed and what needed to be done, and some of the comments that were kind of floating around the BC legislature in regards to what the possibilities of why the holdup could be, definitely kept me awake at night. I believe we had a few phone calls with the province that definitely would be kind of burned in the back of my brain in regards to the type of conversations I was having with the teams. But it was an absolute relief when I got the phone call that we were successful in getting it. And it was delayed from December to March, just like our final investment decision has been delayed this year.
Yeah, expected this first quarter of 2024. Do I understand? Like
yes,
soon.
Well, go ahead, Kate.
Yeah. No, and I wanted to touch on a bit here too, like one of the things, um, one of the things that's been, I'm wondering how you're handling the fact that there is a lot of support for the pipeline that will deliver gas to LNG. And there has been some opposition, most notably from the Wet'suwet'en. And I wondering from where you sit representing the Haisla Nation, like, how do you like, what do you do to navigate that? Like, do you do spend a lot of time working with other nations, trying to build a broader tent of support, talking through some of the conversations you've had with the Haisla? Um,
I think all of the
Yeah.
above. However, those conversations with other nations had started well before any of the controversy along the Coastal GasLink pipeline. The relationship building. I'm also the chair of the First Nations LNG Alliance, which is a makeup of nations along the pipeline, along with Nishka and Hawaiian, who also have proposed projects for their territories. It's we building the support in regards to having those key relationships with people to help navigate, and it's a difficult a difficult process to be on the other end of supporting industrial development, and in just thinking that it's a lot easier to say no. It's so much easier to just say no. And the sensationalism that was provided to the people that said no didn't create an environment that was inclusive of everybody's opinion. However, we felt it was important, and during a different project, the Rio Tinto modernization project, our elected leadership was given the mandate from our hereditary system to share opportunities with our neighboring nations. And essentially that came to a fruition through the LNG Canada and Coastal GasLink projects, where and it had never, not that I'm aware of, where other nations were welcomed into other nations' territories to have an opportunity for contracts and employment. One of my first tours of LNG Canada, I was so proud to see Gitgat, which is a community down the channel from us, see their partnerships successfully getting contracts on the LNG Canada project. So opportunities were being extended to other communities. So it wasn't, although it may look like it, we had everything to gain through these projects, that necessarily isn't the reality. We shared those opportunities. We shared at one point during the construction build, I would often joke about having other basketball teams in our community. I'd go to the gym on a Thursday night, and I'd see a full team of Lakwalams, which is another community on the North Coast, that have their own men's basketball team in our community, because they were all working on the LNG Canada site. So they'd come to our community and hang out and play basketball. So developing those relationships, providing the opportunity, because majority of our communities share the same stresses and worries when it comes to managing poverty, managing suicides in our community, and the unemployment rates. And we felt it was important to extend that opportunity to the communities to help them start resolving some of their issues. When it comes to any of the pipeline communities that were in opposition, I often maintained that what was happening in those communities wasn't my business. It was theirs to resolve what was occurring in their communities. So I still maintain that. However, when you think about, and I spoke about our culture and our ties to our land and our environment, those are still key aspects in our culture. And when you think about how I was taught growing up to take care of our territory, our traditional boundaries, and to ensure that 7 generations still had the same access to our territory as I did. And that's always been taught to our membership. You think about it in a global context, being able to provide solutions to the world in order to minimize the impacts of what other countries are enduring. What happens in Asia impacts our territory, impacts our culture, and to be a part of solutions, and that is a perspective that I will always maintain. Being a part of these projects and supporting these projects is we're doing something to impact the global the global aspect of it. So
Yeah, it's interesting. Go ahead. No, I was just a reflection that the world has not seen a project of this scale, Indigenous led, right? Indigenous owned. Any project of this scale historically would have been answerable more to shareholders. And I think what you're about to explore is a difference of a group of people who have a different set of interests and a different relationship to the land.
And 2,000 of them.
And 2,000 of them.
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, Mike.
I was going to say, not that long after you scored your first pair of Air Jordans, you were thrust into that leadership position, and you're dealing with premiers and cabinet ministers and prime minister, I'm sure. I know you're a first name basis with many leading political figures and business figures across Canada. Do you ever think like, whoa, like this is how did I get here, and how times have changed, right?
No, I don't. I often get told I've got about 1.5 years. I think it's less than 1.5 years in my term left for this one. I'm not going to run again, and I the fear of the unknown of I've known this for the last 10 years of my life, 11 years in June. And the fear of the unknown of what's gonna happen, and I'm consistently told that the opportunities are gonna be there, and I really don't. And I think as I'm trying to plan for the future of what's next, is I know the team. I know the amount of effort, work, and the amount of time that's been spent by all the individuals on our team to allow for this success. So I don't look at it from I'm on a first name basis with Christia or Premier AB. I look at it as from our team's perspective, our team's success. So no, I really don't. And I don't look at it that way.
Well, when you retire as chief counselor, you leaving the door open for public service of another type in the future, maybe?
Maybe. I was fortunate enough to meet Lisa Rayett at an event. She's working for CIBC, so she was a part of the Conservative team under Premier Harper, or Prime Minister Harper, sorry.
Right.
And I absolutely love meeting women that have had their time in very crucial moments, and I love learning from them and seeing their strength. And I was fortunate enough to sit beside her in an event in Toronto that I was at, and we were talking about this exact same thing about what's next. And I had told her I'm thinking about going into the private sector. Don't know exactly how that's going to look. I still have my passion and my desire to see more Indigenous participation in major projects, whether that be impacting at a board level or as an advisor type of role. And then she'd made a comment to me saying, yeah, go out and make the money, and then come back when you're a little bit older to politics. And I thought, oh, I never did think of that possibility. So you never know. I have had opportunity to be part of provincial politics. I've been asked if I'd look at that, but I've also been asked at a federal level. And right now, I can say I think I'm done with politics for a little bit.
I'm such a chicken. I've never run for anything. So good for you for getting this far. Well, Chris, this has been fantastic conversation today. Really glad you were able to come and tell us a bit about yourself, the person behind the projects that are happening, exciting projects happening up in your territory. And I'm looking forward to seeing you later this week in sunny, warm Prince George. And appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to talk with us today.
Yes, if I'm at an event or a cocktail party and there's an economist in the room, I will find them and I will pick their brain. I have even gone as far as asking Mark Carney for advice on how to talk to my mother-in-law about inflation. For curious guests, the TLDR of Carney's advice was stick to the weather. The thing I love about economists is their work is equal parts about data, numbers, spreadsheets, yield curves, and fortune telling. It's a rare kind of person who chooses a profession that asks them to channel Spock and Nostradamus equally. And economists have had an extra hard time lately, with a growing number of indicators offering reason for pause, including the latest StatsCan report on the Canadian economy. It shows that Canada had a flat Q3 last year, which is bolstering projections that we could see a shallow recession in early 2024. Also, according to StatsCan, it looks like labor productivity, a measure of real gross domestic product by hours worked across the economy, has declined nationally in 6 consecutive quarters. Productivity is a hard one for Canada. If the Canadian economy were a high school student, we'd be looking for a productivity tutor because it's an aspect of our economy that is consistently ranked as needs improvement. But there's also reason for hope. Many experts are calling the rise in automation, AI, and advanced manufacturing the fourth industrial revolution because of their potential to boost productivity. And BC-based presenting sponsor Telus is poised to help Canada lead that coming revolution through the arrival of 5G technologies. These technologies can boost efficiency and flexibility while enabling more intelligent decision-making and customization in manufacturing and supply chain operations. All the things our economy needs to be embracing in these uncertain economic times. You don't need to be Nostradamus to predict that the GDP and productivity will grow in a regulatory environment that encourages investment. Because without continual investment, the country misses out on getting ahead on things like 5G technologies, which are what we need in order to live long and prosper. See what I did there?
Hello. You've reached the Hotel Pacifico Strategy Suite.
Welcome back, Geoff. Welcome back both to the first strategy suite of 2024.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah, I love the strategy suite. It's good to be back in it.
Renovations look good.
Yeah. I mean, we got a new color motif, a little burnt sienna going on, some 60s vibes, courtesy Mike McDonald. Check out YouTube if you're wondering what I'm talking about. So a few things I want to cover today in the strategy suite. And I want to start actually because Geoff, as you know, we just had HISLA Chief Chris Smith on. And she's up in Prince Rupert getting ready for the BC Natural Resource Forum.
Prince George.
Much colder. Much colder.
It's 2 different places, Kate.
God damn. These wow. I do it for you, Mike, just so you can slam me my Ontario creds. Okay, BC Natural Resource Forum, Prince George. Premier EB is going to be making a keynote speech. It kicks off tomorrow. Can you tell me, Mike, what are people going to be listening for from the Premier? I know you're going up there.
I am. And well, just let me set the scene on BC Natural Resource Forum. This is a forum that was started in the early 2000s by the MLAs up there, Pat Bell and Shirley Bond. And it grew over time to be a meeting place for a lot of different resource industries, energy, forestry, mining, and others. And it's kind of become a can't miss event for stakeholders, First Nations in the North particularly, but not just the North, and government. And credit to both the MLAs in Prince George who've kind of allowed the event to transition from just a kind of what was a BC Liberal sponsored event to something that's, more broadly representative of the resource industry. And credit to the NDP government for continuing to go, and Premier Horgan and now Premier Eby deciding to continue to have those conversations up there. So it'll be about 1,200 people. And from what I understand, there'd be a lot of First Nations representatives there too, which is great. Now, last year, Premier Eby made his first address, pretty new on the job, only about a month in as Premier. And, I think he covered many bases when he spoke last year, but did not utter the phrase natural gas, and which was a surprise given the number of people at the conference that are involved in it, the pipeline that was taking, still under construction at the time, LNG. And it was a revealing kind of moment to say they really don't want to talk about LNG, but they did want to talk about hydrogen, and they do want to talk about critical minerals, and they want to talk about forestry. But this year, I'll be interested to see what the Premier has to say this year about LNG, if anything, because I think we're in election year, and this will be an important signal as to how they're planning to position that issue with their own supporters, but also with the public at large.
What's your take, Geoff? Do you think we'll hear those words, natural gas, LNG?
Well, I'm interested to see as well. I don't quarrel with Mike's statement of what happened, but terrific discussion with Chief Crystal Smith was one of the key events that happened subsequently, which was that her project, her nation's project, got an environmental assessment certificate. And I'd be shocked if it doesn't have a positive FID for a second plant at Kitimat. But also, perhaps more surprisingly in some respects, was the admission into the environmental approval process for the Xyla Sims project, which is closely associated with the Nisga'a Tribal Council, Nisga'a Nation. It's going to have a lot of ownership there. And also, I noticed the news the other day that TC Energy, which has the pipeline approvals, now pretty old approvals that need to be updated for the line that would have to go to Nisga'a territory, is working hard to try to bring in Indigenous equity into that project so that they are more of an Indigenous project with connections to Indigenous projects like the Nisga'a one. It's very much a big question mark how far we can go and still have a clean BC plan. And I think that's the issue that the provincial government's wrestling with. But I would just say in the context of, we're all wearing our sweaters today, or I am anyway, and I think Mike is, the weekend was cold, and we saw the need for a proper integration and some more adult discussion, I think, about energy in Canada generally, because BC had to import energy. It sold some energy to Alberta. Alberta had to send out an email to everybody saying, could you please turn off some lights?
It was more than an email, Geoff. It was an emergency broadcast text to everybody.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. But what I thought was interesting was that within seconds, they saw 100 to 200 megawatts of capacity open up, which indicates, how sort of more integrated planning nationally and provincially would really, really assist as we try to meet our energy needs and our emissions reductions goals, because we don't even have a proper intertie right now. And intertie is a big electrical connection between Alberta and BC. So we may hear more about that, because I think the federal government would also like to be talking more about those kinds of issues.
What does that look like, though? I mean, we're in a context too where I keep hearing about BC, and the sort of struggles ahead for hydro with drought conditions and melting ice caps. And then, our neighbor, you're talking about sharing with Alberta, which has pretty emphatically eschewed renewable energy sources. So
no, it's not true. Alberta's building a lot of renewable energy. A lot.
Sorry, I should say Danielle Smith.
But they're certainly not eschewing any fossil fuel resources.
Well, here's what happened in Alberta. If the wind don't blow, the lights don't glow. They didn't have a lot of wind in the last few days. Plus, you don't get a lot of solar power in the winter after 4 o'clock. And so they have a lot of
freeze.
Yeah, they have a lot of wind and solar capacity in Alberta, but it was not producing any electricity on January the 13th or whenever it was. So that speaks to the need for baseload power. And a lot of that for Alberta, it's a different situation than BC. We have more hydroelectric baseload, of course, because we have the dams. We destroyed many river valleys to get that. in Alberta, they don't have those types of hydroelectric resources.
What
So
also
Well,
the
and
speaks to
energy, you know,
yeah.
just a few years ago, when I was still working in Victoria, there was a line break near Prince George, very close to where Mike's going tomorrow.
Yeah.
And it dramatically reduced the supply of natural gas to BC and put us on the brink of a really terrible situation had we not been able to get it fixed. I say we, it was Enbridge, but it was an eye opener for those of us who are close enough to it to see how vulnerable the situation is. Alberta wound up in a similar scrape because of shut-in plants and stuff this weekend.
And I
All
think
right.
the other kind of fun fact for electricity in British Columbia is that it's obviously we have an abundance of electricity, which is great, but it's in a cold snap. I think in the last year, when we had our coldest day of the year, it was gas doing the heavy lifting in BC, and 2/3 of the energy during the cold snap was natural gas, not BC Hydro. BC Hydro is about 1/3 of it. So we still have a very integrated system here. And I think bringing it back to what Geoff brought up, Silism's LNG project and Cedar and potentially phase 2 LNG Canada, is that there's a lot of talk about electrifying these projects to reduce emissions. But there's a lot of takers for that electricity.
Yeah.
The government talks a lot about green hydrogen, which would require hydroelectric energy. There's population growth. There's electric vehicles. There's municipal action against new construction using natural gas and wanting to use electricity. And that's where I think the adult conversation has to happen, as Geoff alludes to, is where's this electricity going to come from? And even with the call for power that has been issued, that's not going to get the job done either. So,
but maybe a clue though, Mike, to the government's thinking, because it was John Horgan's NDP that wound up the big call that had been there since Gordon Campbell's days for independent power producing.
yeah.
Now Hydro is going to reopen its call precisely because of the shortage you're talking about, and First Nations are very anxious to participate in that revised call for additional hydro. But none of it will come without controversy from an environmental standpoint, in my view.
Geoff, is there any truth to the rumor that the EB government is going to hire Homer Simpson to build a nuclear power plant in Surrey? Is that you haven't heard that one yet?
It's you mean to fund the new hospital, to fund the new hospital, or to power the new hospital?
They're going to need
I don't
power
think
from
so.
somewhere. I don't know.
I can categorically neither confirm or deny that.
Mr. Burns may be an NDP donor. We are not sure. Only $1,400.52. So that's the current donation limit.
That's a good segue to fundraising.
Exactly. And I was going to say we can't move over to the mini bar, Geoff, until you and I have given Mike a bit of moment to just let him bask in the glow of these latest BC United fundraising dollars. I won't steal your headline, Mike, but I just want to say you have told us, I think, again and again, as we've been watching the polls and just, I'm going to say it plainly, like watching BC United just get hammered, that there's a whole bunch behind that too that we also need to watch. There's a whole machinery that BC United has that means that we can't discount them just on the basis of these poll numbers. Yeah. Are you feeling validated today? And tell us a bit, like, what do you think?
Well, the fundraising has certainly had nothing to do with me, so make that clear.
No, on the pod, your comments on the pod are valid.
I think BC United's been trying to say we're not dead, we're resting. And they
the words right out of my mouth.
Yeah.
So anyways, to update our listeners, over the last couple of days, they revealed the fundraising numbers for last year and the last quarter. And my understanding is that BC United finished strong, and they're not that far behind the NDP in terms of the money raised last year. And in fact, the NDP raised a little bit in 2023, a little bit less than they did in 2022, but they're still ahead of the BC United. So it's at least more competitive now. The BC Conservatives didn't raise much at all.
Yeah.
And the BC United point will be, look, we're raising money. We are going to be investing. Plus, they also have another financial advantage, which is the taxpayer funded element of campaigns, which the Horgan government brought in.
Yeah.
And BC United gets a good chunk of that money. And BC Conservatives didn't elect any MLAs last election, so they don't get much at all. So arguably, there's a financial advantage for BC United if that continues. I would argue that it depends where you spend the money. It's one thing to raise the money, it's how do you use it? And I think that's where BC United has to figure out is, okay, well, are they going to just store their nuts in the tree and wait for the election, or are they actually going to start spending it now on some pre-election advertising? And if they do that, it better be good. It better be good creative, because I've been part of a lot of campaigns that blew a lot of money in advertising that didn't do anything. So they've got some decisions to make, but this is the first piece of kind of good behind the scenes political stuff news that BC United's had in a while. And they are continuing to announce candidates as well. And I noticed that they have they announced a couple female candidates out in Langley over the last week or two. And we had that conversation with Vaughn Palmer last, BC United not being very diverse compared to the NDP. Well, here's 2 women nominated in 2 seats they should be able to win if it's a competitive election. So I took note of that as well.
Mike, tell us about the other side of the coin. You're a campaign guy. Is there a realistic pathway for John Rustad, even to opposition leader or something like without any money? Because like his problem, he has no decisions to make because he has no money to spend.
Well, I guess the question is, how much money is the Conservative brand worth compared to the BC United brand? And there is value in that. And I've talked in previous pods with Vaughn and others about the 1991 campaign where Gordon Wilson had no money and rocketed to official opposition. So it's not like it can't happen. That was more of a surprise blitzkrieg that happened within the space of 2 weeks. We know when the elections, we think we know when the election's happening 8 months from now. So there's no surprise factor here. But, Rustad's got some leverage because he's been up in the polls. He's got a brand that people are familiar with. What's his next move? BC United, okay, they've been on their back foot. They finally got some good news. What's their next move? I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Let's raise a glass or take a shot. Time to raid the minibar.
I've been debating this one, but I'm going to take a shot at Eleanor Sturckow, MLA for the BC United, and also very strong critic on crime and drugs. But and a talented person, there's no question. She's a top performer in the Kevin Falcon team. But recently she weighed in just on Twitter, but I thought it was worrisome on what I thought was a ridiculous piece that ran in the National Post suggesting that the David Eby government was about to give fentanyl to children without asking their parents first, or it hit every sort of button in the conservative lexicon about how terrible government can be, especially taking parents out of the mix. But it would take too long to explain what's really going on here. But even though fentanyl is a terrible thing in illicit drug supply, it has been part of daily life in the healthcare system for a generation now, prescribed in hospital for those of us who've had surgery, and is very welcome, I have to say, if you're recovering from surgical pain or have trauma. And so fentanyl has a role and is prescribed in the healthcare system. What I think she's pointing to, and I hope that she gets closer to a better debating point, because there are a lot of legitimate debates to have about this, is that the Portland Health Society has been developing a protocol with the BC Centre for Substance Use, which was a project of Terry Lake under the government that Mike worked with, and it brings forward a lot of expertise. A protocol about how fentanyl could be used in a prescribing setting to support people who are struggling with substance abuse disorders. And so I'm alarmed because I think the article is ridiculous, it's false, it's misleading, it's full of misinformation, and I think that Eleanor Sturckow could do us all a service by refraining from amplifying that until we've had a chance to talk about what's really going on here and what might be helpful to save lives.
Okay, well, Geoff got Sturcowed.
My shot.
Yeah.
My shot.
That's good. Or Sturckow got Meggs. Yeah.
I'll Sturcowed up. Yeah.
Got Meggs. Yeah.
Sturckow got Meggs. What am I doing this week? I'm gonna raise a glass to. I got to be careful how many glasses I'm going to raise to politicians that retire, because this could go on forever. But
there'll be a whole bunch of them in October.
I will raise a glass. I will raise a glass to Jordan Sturdy, who announced in the past week that he was not going to seek re-election. And I just want to note on Jordan's case is that Jordan was a different type of BC Liberal / BC United MLA. Like, here's this big, burly mayor of Pemberton farmer with an earring who didn't look like your usual BC Liberal cookie cutter candidate. And he also had a different perspective in caucus. He was an independent thinker. He is an independent thinker. He's still there. He's an independent thinker. So he did 3 terms. He just sneaked in last time by about 30 votes over the Green Party, who almost won that seat. So looking ahead in that riding, sea to sky, that's a tough one for BC United to hold without Jordan. But even with Jordan, it'd be a tough one to hold. We'll see what happens. But the Greens certainly have their eye on that riding. And I wouldn't be surprised if the NDP think they might have a shot on a 3-way split too. So yeah, that'll be an interesting one to watch. But Jordan, he made his mark, and he'll be up at North Arm Farm
so let's
in
just
Pemberton.
we're not pouring as many retirement shots as I thought we might, Mike. Not naming any names in the NDP benches, but even on the BC United side, people are signing up to run again in larger numbers than I would have expected. Is that your view too?
Oh, I guess it's not. There's, this is the annoying thing about these types of stories. If you're the party that's complaining, is that if people aren't running again, it's like, oh, the rats are leaving a sinking ship. But if they do run again, it's like, oh, there's no renewal.
They're old and
they're worn out, burnt out hacks.
But I think it is important, as I think I mentioned last week, that there does need to be more space for new people to run. And so Norm Letnick, Mike Morris, there's been others who've said they're not running again. Now Jordan Sturdy. And frankly, they do need to clear some more space so that younger, more diverse, but just frankly talented people they need who can do a political role, have a chance to get in there. So I think we'll see more of that, but it'll be a balance. Where it ends up, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Cool.
No, yeah. And I have to say, I do appreciate when you guys and Mike, when you raise your glass to the retirees. I think it's a great time to sort of check in on the legacy of who's stepping down and then the riding itself. So listeners, let us know if you feel otherwise, but I think it's time well spent. I'm going to raise my glass real quick. I'm going to raise my glass to cervixes across BC. I need to do this because I think it was interesting. Like the shift itself is actually, we can chuckle about it, but it's actually a pretty big deal. Because the existing screen for cervical cancer, which is a pap test, you have to go in and find a doctor to do it. It's actually at best uncomfortable, at worst, like traumatic. It's really good now that BC is going to be the first province in Canada to move to at-home screening for cervical cancer. So that's great. I wanted to bring it up and give it some daylight because I think if we were getting rid of that test where you guys have to go to the doctor and you move to the side and you cough, there'd be jokes and columns and all about it. And the cervixes haven't got enough attention. So I'm raising my glass to them.
Well, I thought it got a lot of attention, Kate. I was really glad to see that announcement as well. But I thought it resonated quite a bit in a bipartisan way, which was unusual.
I think in that sense, you're right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It got embraced. Yes. Yeah. Just trying to use the word cervix as much as I can on this podcast. That's all, gentlemen. All right.
Good.
Don't know what to say after that. Certainly not going to take a shot at it, that's for sure.
That was the aim. All right. That's it for our stay today. Thanks so much, guests, for joining us. And thanks to our guest, Crystal Smith, for stopping by and to presenting sponsor, TELUS. We'll see you next week, guests. BC, you can never leave.
Checkout time at Hotel Pacifico. We hope you enjoyed your stay.